All right now. Gone with the Whales, Chapter 12. The Land of Cockaigne, which is, readers, that is a mythical paradise. The time of our Aleuts came, as we came to a coast which was more and more indented by fjords. Forests of southern beach, nearly pure sands, ran down the hills to the narrow seas. It was now March, and fall was far advanced. The beaches were various shades of green, and there were swatches of darker green. Some unfamiliar pine-like tree made a beautiful palette, and white was added. Ice was seen, and a quite small glacier, only a mile across, at the head of a fjord, drew our eyes. This was a sacred moment. The two spirit men, our friends, Click and Yak, paddled their kayak, singing loudly for all to hear, to the foot of the creaking ice bluff, followed at a distance by me and Kath and Lolo in the proa, and a whaleboat with the three Graces, Indian Bob, Cascades, and others. The weather was merciful, sunny and still. Click and Yak prayed as they landed. An eagle appeared as they came ashore. Then another. They circled over twice and departed southward, as if to say, "Come with us, we shall guide you." A good sign, all agreed. Soon appeared a better omen yet. No two-legged people yet, but a pod of orcas appeared. Yakutat immediately offered something to the waters. No doubt, I thought, it was an orchid food brought from the north. Orca food. They were solemn, but tears squeezed from their eyes. Friends from home were here. They had been prepared for finding no familiar animals at all. They were very brave. All of us aboard, when faced with any seemingly impossible task, would look at each other and say, "We shall not grow tired. We are Aleut." And men, human beings so-called, soon came to us in a dugout canoe from the very next uncharted fjord. There were 4 men and a woman in a heavy, probably beechwood dugout, floating low with little freeboard. A fire burned amidships in a bowl of rough stones. A large woman tended it. There were 2 men forward and 2 more aft. They paddled with large, wide paddles. These were large people. It seemed, though they were sitting, that you could tell all 5 were over 6 feet, and one man looked almost 7 feet. We had expected this, of course. Darwin had reported extensively on these strange people and their state of undress. The 5 between them had only 2 small cloaks on, of vicuña fur, I think, although in the dugout I saw, along with leaves and roots and fish, more hides in a pile. And underneath the woman was an old brownish, yellowish, thick fur, like a bison robe. I thought, maybe that's a trade item that they got from the whalers. I saw an iron kettle, and the naked woman had on copper earrings. The meeting of the 5 and the 2 was most poignant. Every one of us crewmen, of course, stayed aboard, while Klickitat and Yakutat, spirit bearers of the north, paddled out to meet the spirit holders of the south. Whales could be seen spouting afar, 2 double spouts. The crewmen said they were southern right whales. We could see that the Patagonians were built very much like the Aleuts, not at all fat or snub-nosed like the Eskimo, the Inuit, but rather lanky and long-boned, not fat, but heavy-boned, except the Patagonians were larger in every dimension. They actually looked quite alike, even to skin color. But whereas the Patagonians wore little or nothing, it was about 35 degrees Fahrenheit and foggy, the Aleuts were ceremonially clad in clothing that was specially prepared by the tribe's women. The women of each clan had sewn the garments made from that animal, and none was left out of the panoply of warm, snug clothing. Other pieces of clothing had been sewn atop the ends of the kayak so that all of the animals could be represented, to show their relatives all that existed in their land. A solemn silence fell as the two stopped paddling and they all stared at one another. For some awful reason, I was reminded of the Battle of the Monitor and the Virginia. But I had no fear, and nor did they, our friends. All they had, all they were, was a gift to the South. What fear could they have? The Patagonians stared in silent synchrony. Without one single word uttered, the two vessels slowly swung parallel and paddled off together around a headland, up the fjord and out of sight. We kept an awed silence, except the joyous birds. Some of us prayed. I didn't need to pray. I felt we were already in good hands. For 3 whole days, we saw them no more. We were moored alone at the mouth of the foggy fjord near the north shore in worsening weather. It was still not too windy, however, and our birds remained active, of which more anon. That first evening, we all were tense, awaiting news of our friends and the locals. Some of the whalers thought that the local giants were so savage that they might have even killed and eaten click and yak. But we naturalists, from our experiences in the Galapagos, we never lost faith. Near dusk, in light rain, we heard a foghorn. We thought a large steamship must be approaching. But one foghorn, up high into the southeast, was joined by another and another until 6 or so rumblings could be heard. More like an Australian didgeridoo than a foghorn, along with a very deep whirring noise. A whaler said he called it a bull roar or woomera, an Australian word. It was a light piece of wood on a long cord, which was whirled until it rotated. In addition, there was a deep drum-like pounding, and possibly a hollow trunk, and a very faint clacking could be heard. That sounded like the Aleuts whom we knew and loved. My hand on the railing could feel our whole ship vibrating. It felt like a welcoming corroboree or hootenanny. It turned out later that this was the case. Could these people, though tall, be related to the Australian blacks? Knowing what we knew, it seemed possible. Then for 2 more days, we waited. No dugouts nor sailing ships were seen. Few Yankee ships seemed to come on the Horn Passage now for us to hide from. Was the economy of the USA in turmoil? Probably. How many whalers had the Confederate Navy sunk? Oh, we wished to be on another planet from Yankee land. Yes, we did. Although we were Yankees, all of us, mostly, that is. Meanwhile, we watched the birds. Our finches seemed to have formed teams, like the boisterous lads around the head latrine. When a female human sat down, their twittering increased. One team of 6 or 7 variegated birds was seen to set off eastward, then to return hours later bearing leaves, seeds, and berries, which were dropped on deck and chirped over by many budding bird scientists, hungry ones. They came from their warm nests and roosts all over the ship. Even the tortoises were consulted. They gravely sampled leaves and twigs, indicating by their activities which ones they approved of. The huge, hard people even raised their heads in the unusual cold for them all and stared right at the tiny twittering people as they groaned out their slow advice, eye to eye. It was thrilling to watch. We took turns warming those tortoises with our bodies. Lolo and the Graces collected herbs from shore by the bird selections for turtle and bird food. and medicine. Our mariner, our albatross, slowly took wing and circled the area of the fjord mouth, again and then again. Then he circled over one headland. With a spyglass we could see he was showing us a pile of firewood intended for a pyre by the Patagonians. Then our albatross circled high up over a site farther away, which we could not see from the ship. It later became apparent he had found and was marking, just for us, the site of the previous night's music party / sacred ceremony. Our taciturn mariner was proving a very resourceful, thoughtful, and tireless scout for us, like the Finches, all without our even having to ask. Dolphins usually were nearby, not the ones from the Galapagos, however, but the local group seemed to change daily. Probably we were a sensation with our wide open hearts and our zany spirits to all our relations. We certainly hoped so. Finally, on a clearing day, our kayakers returned. Their craft was notably higher in the water. Obviously, our friends had offloaded many gifts and had returned for more. Our welcome was joyous, and they too shouted and sang and danced their way aboard. On deck we hugged and cried and danced our fumbling alley-oop dances as they laughed and joked, and generally we greeted our now very dear brothers. Finally subsiding into seriousness, they told us in very good English, although animal names still bothered them, they told us of their experiences. They wished to tell us as much as possible. We, being representatives of our race, seeking a new way to live in peace, to know that they knew our true purpose was a powerful endorsement, and it stiffened our resolve. In our hearts, as we said, we were Aleut, untiring, indomitable, compassionate. These people, we learned, had immediately accepted the Northerners. The Patagonians were afraid and suspicious of whalers and Chileans, yet they felt our Aleuts as allies. They had feasted on steamed shellfish, broiled fish, seaweed-flavored crab chowder, and for a sweet, dried berries in a soup with seal blubber. All of these were somewhat familiar to Click and Yak, though the tastes were subtly different, they said. Language proved to be insurmountably difficult at first, but the Patagonians knew a sign language, which was used as far as the fat people of the far north, the gauchos of the Argentine pampas. It was not the same sign language, we found, as Indian Bob and Cascadas's Plains Indian sign talk, but the Aleuts learned fast. When Click admired their dugouts and asked by gestures how old it was, the Patag spread his hands wide, wide, wide. Then he pretended to shoot a dart with one hand at his other hand and far out to sea. Everyone laughed. What a good way to show something was very old. By the way, these people had bows and arrows, and atlatls, spear throwers. These are both known worldwide. Probably they were invented numerous times, I'd say. New signs were invented on the spot. Their sign for Aleut was a hand over a tall head and another over a shorter head, meaning something like, us, only shorter. Flattering. Much laughter all around. They loved to laugh. Did they ever? They took the Aleuts up on a cliff for sport. There, near the edge, in a gusty, rainy wind, they all stood on one leg to see who could stand the longest. If anyone fell toward the cliff, others rushed to save them, of course, but mockery prevailed. Then, after returning to a sheltered valley on a rocky, near-dry streamlet, they played a game called, in sign language, We Are the Hairy People. They tied scraps of fur onto themselves and then found a pile of dung. probably from dogs or the local wild coyotes. Yes, coyotes were there. They found the dung and rolled in it. Then they rushed to the stream and rolled in gravel till they were stone-covered people.
I gotta draw out some
Shh, would you keep it down a little, please? They rushed to the stream and rolled in gravel till they were stone-covered people. They gaily threw mud and dung at one another. They stomped a lot and stamped on dung. The object seemed to be to see who could keep the most smelly, pebbly stuff clinging to them. We didn't understand the origin of this joke until later, but it looked like lots of fun, though hard on one's clothing, if any. Normally, the naked people wore a heavy coating of grease, which helped keep them warm, we guessed. The grease resembled bear grease, but smelled different, milder, not rancid, like polar bear grease. I knew the only bears on the South American continent were the small brown striped spectacle bears, or honey bears, of the Amazon. When later we asked where the grease came from, they pointed north and signed the fat people. They traded north, clearly, but seemed nervous about it. Were they at war with the northerners? Did they eat them? Was there disease there? Or were they simply naturally secretive? Well, even with them, the Aleuts described, the Southerners often would not gesture or speak on some matters. Long habits of fearing all outsiders were probably hard to break. The most touching scene described by our Aleuts was the gift giving. Having eaten, sung, danced, and been prayed over by the shaman, whose name was Patag, in his raven feathers. Raven was another powerful relative from home. Klickitat and Yakkutat began to pass out items of clothing. Mostly they were too small for the Patagonians, but many mothers in the crowd of 30 or so that were present, many mothers put the garments on their children with reverence and glee. At each revelation, one Aleut would try to explain in signs the animal. The other would become the animal in mime, and they'd sing the songs together. Plus, a treasure was given. Each animal had been beautifully carved in white walrus ivory. These magical images were passed hand to hand as the rich furs were felt and smelt to wonderment impossible to describe. A tribal ecstasy took hold. Small pieces of dried meat were passed out, of a few animals only, mostly herbivores, for them to taste. Some even spit them out, but others picked them up reverently and ate them, dirt and all, and bowed to the Aleuts. Many such gestures were universal to everyone's joy. Now the Aleuts had returned for more presents and to prepare us all for a visit from the Patags. That was our name for them all, Patags. They explained they would return with 6 Patags, the shaman, whose name was Patag, 2 of the men we'd seen, named Yangu and Walkut, and the woman with the copper earrings, Panagal, and 2 others, leaders of their bands. We were asked to hide all money, coins, and bills. Believe it or not, it was blowing and rolling all over our decks, and we would have no fires aboard when they came. They were doubtful about the cook stove. We decided to shut it down also. Lamps, they said, were permitted. Also, we were not to look any of them in the eye, nor speak unless spoken to. Click and Yak would interpret for us. We decided never to outnumber them. No more than 5 of us were to be with them at any one time. No incense, nor tobacco, nor other smoke must be smelled. They always brought one woman along, usually just one, in any group of men. This was a sacred rule, incomprehensible to us then. The woman never led nor followed, but instead was always at the heart of the group. We started to understand then. These people were happy. Rain or snow, the weather was fine. Food was fine. Games were fine. Everybody knew everybody. Later, we were shown all their places. In the music place, high on a bluff, where the sound could shoot a dart far over the water, we saw 6 huge, twisted elephant trunks of some wood-like stuff, hollow, 3 inches or so wide at one end and 1 foot wide at the other. The 6 were from 30 to 50 feet long. We were shown this plant, still alive. Not a tree, but a century plant of the yucca family, growing singly on a pebbly, dry hillside. This plant only flowered once, but left these amazingly hollow trunks. The sound needed huge lungs to produce effectively. They were like big, goofy, naked Texans, I thought. Sure enough, there were also 2 large beech logs, 6 feet long by 3 feet thick, hollowed by fire, with slits cut on top. These were drums, played with heavy sticks. The music place was pounded hard by many heavy dancing feet. We also were at a council, I guess you'd call it. It was also a luau and a party. A dozen of us shared a large conical shelter with 2 Aleuts and 18 patags. 5 women, 10 men, 3 children. The walls were whale bones covered with some bark and skins, with a very big hole in the top. The floor was oval, with a fire near one end of the oval. All the smoke went out, but wind and a little cold rain came in. The fire was larger than usual for them. This was a courtesy to us. About 5 little logs of good dried hardwood. Around it, we 12 huddled shivering. Beside our group sat the Aleuts, 10 feet from the fire. And at the other end of the oval, 25 feet away, the patags sat, not touching one another, naked and visibly sweating profusely. They smilingly explained by gestures, rather eloquently, that fire was so sacred to them that they used it sparingly. A little was enough, they gestured. We all laughed. They normally used each other for heat, outdoors or in. Snuggling was a science, and so was giggling. I was reminded of the Tibetan saint, wizard, and yogi named Milarepa and his sect, as described by the intrepid Alexandra David Neal. These repas of Tibet have perfected a breathing technique by which they can build a fire in their stomach, and thus they can live in high caves without fire. These adepts actually even take a vow never to approach a fire. The patags, however, seem to do it naturally. We were too shy, at least I was, to touch them, but the Aleuts reported they felt no warmer than ordinary people, but not cold either. However, one time at that council, I had eaten some Oregon psilocybin mushrooms in order to better perceive the truth of my surroundings. Across their shelter, the patags' bodies seemed to emit a slight yellow glow, unlike anything I've ever seen. Maybe the yellow grease in the firelight was part of it. The patags invented a flattering sign for us, our new crew. They would draw an arc in the air to the south and point downward here and there. This meant, said the Aleuts, that our clothes and ship were multicolored. From that, we were pleased to call ourselves then the Rainbow People. But it turned out later they had named us the Great Southern Lights People. They had named us the Great Southern Lights People. The lights, too, are multicolored like a rainbow. and they're in the sky in an arc to the south. And we saw the lights, yes, we all saw them. A modest display, perhaps, but the white curtains had shafts of red streaking down toward us, like spears of fire into our hearts. The faint light showed tears in Aleut's eyes, and ours, all of ours. The actual visit to Vesta was most moving of all, perhaps. It was noon. Patag the shaman was first to climb up the ladder to our deck, silent, tall, like a raven's claw at 7 feet, with raven atop his head and with wings. Then came 2 men, and the woman came up, cradling in one arm a stone bowl. As soon as the 6 were all aboard, Patag silently gestured to Klickitat to be taken to a place of fire. He and we all had not expected this, but it immediately became obvious to me what was going on. Click did not display any surprise. We went softly to the cook stove below decks, where Panagal reverently uncradled her precious jewel in its dry, soft, mossy bed, a living coal. At that moment, I realized with relief that not even one lamp was lit aboard Vesta. With unfamiliar kindling in an iron stove, she swiftly brought to our ship the sacred fire from their very own home hearth. What more meaningful gesture could they make from their traditions to a ship named Vesta? They had, of course, seen our figurehead, the woman with a torch. With awe, Yakutat said of them. Adam said, "God is great, God is great, God is great," over and over and over, said Adam. Yes, he spoke aloud. For a moment, many prayers were heard in many languages. Many people watched, shyly, unseen. Then Click and Yak and Patag simultaneously gestured for silence, and 5 of our crew followed, or led them actually, to the painted chamber. On the way, we proceeded extremely slowly so the Southerners could appreciate the amazing multicolored murals which were everywhere, which I have described. They were dazed as well as awed. At the chamber, K and Y in the lead, they paused. Silently, Yakutat went for a firebrand from the cook stove, with which he entered the cabin with prayer and lit a single whale oil lamp in the center on a round table. Then the Aleuts produced their drum and a fine rawhide rattle which we had never seen before, and they sang a welcoming song. As one by one their huge guests crammed into the small cabin, followed by 5 of us. I was not one of us for once, but Adam was, and I know his account is true. True as the Bible, which he reads daily. God is great. As each animal's image was pointed to, very sacredly, with only one finger, the 3rd finger of the left hand. One of the Aleuts would drum and sing the animal's song, while the other would sing along and mime the animal's movements. Amazingly, the shaman, in a rumbling basso, and several other men and the woman sang along in parts, after having heard a great variety of songs only once, days before. Of course, all present knew that the Spirit was at work. Adam glowed with pride, silently, of course, as he contemplated the work of his studio's hands. 8 black hands and many brown and white ones also. As they all passed out of the cabin again, the shaman led them in breaking the silence, laughing uproariously at the black cat sphinx, who had perched, like Edgar Allan Poe's raven, on a chair back in his path. He picked her up and stroked her. She purred, we all smiled, and the party began. We were still cautious and few in numbers, not wanting to intimidate them, but talk and gestures and sharing took place. Our women appeared in a group bearing presents. Need I describe them? Yes, yes. Have you had enough love and wonder of what love can do? Well, the presents they carried included an axe, dried food and spices, a few pieces of lace and cloth. We were not sure of their taboos, if any, and the women all presented their gifts for approval by the shaman and the woman before turning them over. And some did make him frown and were not taken, like an iron cooking kettle. He seemed to disdain most iron things, but not the axe after hesitation. Flint and steel were known and accepted, but not mirrors, nor pins. It was a puzzle to us. Shyly, many of us gathered silently on deck to see them off. They were decked with leis of dry herbs made by the Hawaiians. We all, led by the 4 Polynesians, sang Amazing Grace, and they paddled off. But not for long. We proceeded to see them off and on for 2 weeks as the weather got colder. Some things I have already described. Click and Yak wanted to talk with a few of us privately. It was me and Catherine, Lolo, Adam, and Eve to listen. This was a serious talk. They wanted to discuss their people's greatest failing and how to tell the Patags about it to save them from it. It is about the Inuit, they said. This was their name for the Eskimo people. It is about the Inuit, they said. These people had been their enemies for centuries at least. Long ago, Aleuts lived much farther north also, but the Inuit had come from the west, and with superior technology for the treeless, almost landless far north, they had displaced the Aleut. The Aleuts admitted with shame that they used to sneer. Their joke was, Inuit can make sled runners out of their own frozen shit, but we don't have to. We have trees. Our Aleut said, we and they should never have been enemies. It must not be. No more. Like your people, north and south, we too must learn to live together, to share the earth, our mother, and the sea, our grandmother. When they continued, when the Kabluniat, the White Eyes, when the Kabluniat came, all the attention went to these enemies, not to us Aleuts. The words of their language even entered English, igloo, harpoon, mukluks. Even the word Eskimo, though they disliked the name, which means eaters of raw flesh. Never Aleut words. And we knew things the Inuit never could learn by the fates. They got all the kettles, the guns, the axes, knives, whiskey too. We got missionaries, bad Russian stuff, vodka, diseases, and slavery to Ruskies. So we hated them more and more. But why? Our sounds and islands, our waters are still rich in fish and furs and timber. Why need we be jealous of them? Now, do the Patags have neighbors? Our Aleuts asked. Who are these fat people we hear about? Can we teach them how to make peace as you wish to do also? We are troubled, O friends of ours, and we do not wish to infect another race with our faults. This humble and touching speech led us to delve into the Patags' culture further, ashore with them a few days later. They had had a visit from Tierra del Fuego, the large island to the south, from their close relatives there. Word had spread of us. They had sent their 2 best English speakers to talk with us. This helped us all greatly. In another council with the Aleuts, we talked story, as they say in Hawaii. I'll abbreviate and translate. Us. Do you have neighbors? They. Yes. The Iron Hats, that meant Chileans and Argentinians. The Stinky Canoes, that meant whalers and all white man's ships. The hairy people, the fat people. Who are they, the hairy people? Oh, they're very few. You don't know them because they hide. They are even bigger than us. Whispers among them. Yes, they're bigger, and they take our food if they can. They don't talk words, but they make sounds. And they can talk, more whispers. They can talk without words, without sound. We asked, what do they say? They said, oh, you know. We didn't know. Where the whales are. What the mountains are thinking. Where the vicuñas are. Oh, the hairy people, they lie and they joke and tell stories too. Very strange stuff, old spirit stuff. They don't like us or anybody except maybe the fat people. More whispers. And I asked, and who are these fat people? Do you trade with them for buffalo robes? I asked. They were puzzled. I said, I have seen the robe of fur, of thick brown fur, in your dugout under Panagal. Is that from the fat people? Much worried looks and whispering. We go now, they said, and they left. Click and Yak followed them to talk. We were devastated, not knowing why they had left. Next day, Click and Yak came and told us, you talked badly. They had to leave out of shame for you. We, however, are beginning to understand. So we talked to them, saying, you were young, from a young and crazy land, and wanted only their advice and maybe help. Then they continued, we told them about us and the Inuits, as we told you, of our shame. Yes, friends, you gave us courage to say this to them. And they replied, we have a shame too. We have decided. Tomorrow we will tell you and your friends. It may be for you a warning, like the one you have given us about your Inuit relatives. Be prepared tomorrow for a long walk. We will meet you here tomorrow early, said the others. Next day, 10 of us, and Click and Yak, paddled and rowed to a shore camp, where 10 patags greeted us warmly and let us off. Hours later, in a silent, rather calm, dry, light snowfall, we came to a bluff of tuff or some similar porous soft rock. Near the shore, this dry land still had some precipitation. This bluff, 100 feet high or so, was riddled with caves. They were too many and too regular to be natural. They were all between 4 and 6 feet wide and high or more. Couldn't see inside them. Many had sticks and what looked like old dung falling out of them. Only 4 of the many caves looked like they were recently used or occupied, perhaps. These had rickety ladders, 15 to 40 feet long, connecting them to the ground. The flimsy ladders looked like they wouldn't hold even a small man. 3 caves gaped blackly. The 4th had a door of a golden greenish thick fur. At the foot of the bluff, there were leaned 4 long sheets of bark, making a rude lean-to about 20 feet high. Patag whistled loudly. A stir in the lean-to led to a sharpened tree trunk being poked out, followed by a huge man. He was twice Patag's height, easily 12 feet, I'd say. He waved and spoke their tongue. Then he laughed, an amazing sight. He was too polite to point. No. Okay. Then this huge man laughed, an amazing sight. He was too polite to point, but he nodded his head at us and laughed so hard he dropped his 100-pound spear. right near my foot. He was laughing at us. Patag, through the English speakers, explained. Long ago, he said, many large animals lived on the land here. We ate them, of course. So did the northerners, the ones we call fat people, because they are all rich and think that we are all poor. And they take the fat of the animals of the land and the sea and leave them lean meat to rot. I thought, that's exactly like the Lakota view of us as fat takers. The Lakota call us wasichu. I thought so, I thought, in self-congratulation. I was so proud of my education. But that is not the story, they said gravely. No, I thought. They continued, these large animals are all gone. Only the little quick vicuña of the beautiful shining hair remain, and the guanaco, and they are few. Of course, we have rabbits and coyotes and condors, but we don't eat them except the rabbits. Creator, we think, has punished us and the northern fat people for greed. Now we must take our chances on the high seas, the stormy seas, in our heavy, heavy dugouts to get food. Woe to us. And yet, we have a secret. When the huge animals, the tuskers, the long necks, the horses, when they went away and took their spirit away, one remained behind, because we kept him, to own for ourselves, no longer free and equal like us, but well-fed and fat. Behold our secret, the real fat people. He motioned to the giant. He, chuckling, lifted his spear to the largest cave and poked it at the golden door. The door moved. A screaming roar was heard. A brown, yellow arm came out of the door, which wasn't a door. The arm had 3 red-brown curved claws a foot long. It came out quickly. The story, not the beast. Don't worry. The story came out. These creatures were kept in the caves and fattened forever on nothing but tree leaves, which were brought to them. The flimsy ladders were for very young boys to climb and feed the beasts. Then they had to jump away sometimes. The ladders were flimsy because otherwise the beasts could actually climb down and escape after killing them all. What were they? Scientists, finally, later we learned, had named them appropriately Megatherium, the largest of the 14 known so-called extinct species of ground sloth. Quite possibly the largest land mammal ever to live in the New World. Yes, they could outweigh a mammoth, yes. The ladders were also rickety so that the hairy people could not climb them and use them to help free these fat people. The big-footed hairy ones were Pachamama, the earth, and she wants her children to be free, not corralled or penned up. To own a soul is not good. Let them live free. Ask their permission to hunt them, and do not kill many, nor the very best. That is the way. A silence fell. Then more explanations. Why did they keep the fat people? Because they were big, many meals, easy to kill in a cave. They had few bones, but heavy, useful ones, and they ate only leaves. The people could get tree leaves, though now they had to bring them away. They said, they are not heavy, we are not tired. I thought, they are alley-oop. They had other reasons also. The fur, as I had seen in the dugout, was far longer and thicker than vicuña or seal, etc. And it was durable. Second, both fur and flesh were greasy, and that yellow grease never went rancid nor rotten. K and Y said, so was the grease of the sea cow, which the Kabluniat killed. I thought, and so was dodo grease and turtle oil too. And who is your large laughing guard, we asked. They said, people his size used to be born often to us. It is our pride that this was so. But like the hairy ones, they are very few now. Of caves, we have 3 more places, maybe 2 hands in all. That meant 10 used caves. And only 4 of the huge ones, our guards. No women. They are our guards because only they of us are much bigger than the hairy people. And if a fat person should escape, he may be able to head him off from the village at the certain cost of his own life until our spearsmen can arrive. Our big guards had prayed about this. They too, like our fat people themselves, are of the old times, the ice times, when we still had bigger trees. The old spirits are all dying, and they know it. They are ready. But mating the beasts is still a nightmare, and usually fatal to one or more of us. The cubs are not beautiful. I asked about red hair. I could see that the giant had black hair and 1 row of teeth. Red hair on humans was unknown to them, but the big-footed hairy people were mostly reddish. Some were brown or black. This is a note from Robbie Gordon, and I remember this very well as I was writing this sentence. At 2013, here in my bed, the largest red-brown moth I have ever seen just landed on my left wrist and sat there on my brown shirt sleeve, wings trembling. I spoke aloud to her, terrified of her. I told her so, and it was a she. I could tell by her skinny antennae. Now back to Jack's story. All this was in my mind at the Magellan Straits as we bid farewell to our Patags and Aleuts. As we sailed away, we sang way down upon the Swanee River. I cannot describe our actual goodbyes. It is too painful yet. It's almost Russian. That's the end of the chapter.